Most of us have heard the horrific tales of hired guns like Richard the Iceman Kuklinski and John Gotti. However, history has provided us with a slew of bloodthirsty evildoers who have slipped through the cracks. Possibly the worst serial killers for the mob, these people born without morals or feelings made their mark in history. Murder, Inc. The Jewish mob, Murder Incorporated, was an organized crime group active from 1929 to 1941 that acted as the enforcement arm of the Italian-American Mafia. Murder, Inc. was believed to be responsible for between 400 and 1,000 contract killings until the group was exposed in 1941. During its tenure, it spawned many petty street thugs into infamous mafia killers that ruled the era of the mob. Murder, Inc. hitmen used a wide variety of weapons to murder their victims. The group had a large number of members. The killers were paid a regular salary and retainer as well as an average fee of $1,000 to $5,000 per killing. Their families also received monetary benefits. If the killers were caught, the mob would hire the best lawyers for their defense. Most of the killers we point out here got their start with Murder, Inc. Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss was a feared enforcer for Murder, Inc., the gang of killers employed by various organized crime groups, primarily in New York. Strauss was the most prolific killer, committing over 100 murders, with some historians putting the number as high as 500. Strauss was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1909 and quickly fell into a life of crime. By the age of 25, Strauss had already been arrested 17 times in New York City. As was typical of organized crime figures of the day, Strauss was never convicted of any of these early transgressions. An assistant district attorney in New York said Strauss had never been convicted of so much as smoking on a subway platform. By the time Strauss was a full-blown assassin for Murder, Inc., he used many tools to get rid of witnesses, enemies, and anyone else who had crossed the mafia. He carried a knife, gun, and an ice pick so he could choose between weapons when killing a target. Strauss was sometimes sent out of town to conduct business as he was so thorough. Strauss continued to murder throughout the 1930s until a fellow Murder, Inc. associate decided to talk to authorities and pin a number of crimes on his fellow gang members. During his trial, Pittsburgh Phil Strauss attempted to convince the judge and jury that he was insane. He grew a long beard, quit bathing, and made a point of chewing on a leather briefcase strap throughout the ordeal. The jury wasn't buying the act, however, and Strauss, along with his companion Martin Bugsby Goldstein, was sentenced to death in Sing Sing Prison's electric chair known as Old Sparky. On June 12, 1941, Strauss was executed. Anthony Brancato. Anthony Brancato was an American hitman who served as a freelance gunman to various mafia and syndicate organizations from 1914 to 1951. In 1914, Brancato became involved in armed robbery and drug dealing. He later moved to Southern California, arriving in Los Angeles during the early stages of the feud between the Los Angeles crime families. Brancato was immediately available to find freelance work. He soon compiled a criminal record including illegal gambling, narcotics, and bootlegging. He was considered a suspect in many gangland slayings, including that of New York mobster Bugsy Siegel. Brancato frequently teamed up with fellow Kansas City criminal Anthony Trombino. The two men were arrested 46 times in total on charges ranging from robbery, rape, and assault. On May 28, 1951, the two Tonys, as they were called, robbed the sports betting operation at the syndicate-controlled Flamingo Hotel and Resort in Las Vegas, Nevada, escaping with $3,500 in cash. Neglecting to wear a mask during the robbery, Brancato was identified by a sportsbook manager. Having identified the duo as the Flamingo Las Vegas robbers, the mob was soon looking for Brancato and Trombino. On August 6, 1951, Brancato and Trombino were shot to death about 7:30 in the evening, sitting in the front seat of their Oldsmobile on Ogden Street near Hollywood Boulevard. No suspects were ever charged with the two Tonys' murders, and they remained unsolved. Although the LAPD still strongly suspected the LA mob of the murders, the two Tonys' murder case would remain unsolved until an informant named Jimmy Fradiano entered the Federal Witness Protection Program over 25 years later and admitted to murdering the duo with Charlie Battaglia. Fred Burke. Fred Killer Burke was an American armed robber and contract killer responsible for many crimes during the Prohibition era in the late 1940s. He was considered a prime suspect in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929. Burke had moved to St. Louis, Missouri in 1915, where he became a member of the city's top gang, Egan's Rats. Burke, described as tall, well-built, and honest-looking, acted as a frontman for the Egan gang in various forgeries and frauds. Burke and his associates were contracted by Al Capone, who referred to them as his American boys. Based in Chicago, Burke and his associates were involved in murders and armed robberies as far east as Brooklyn, New York, and Paterson, New Jersey, and as far south as Louisville, Kentucky. In 1928 and early 1929, Al Capone had a conflict with Bugs Moran and his Irish gang from Chicago's North Side. Burke and his associates lured 5 members and 2 associates of the Moran gang to a garage on Clark Street in Chicago. Burke and his associates entered the garage, some dressed as police, and executed the Moran gang members. Following the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Burke continued his pattern of armed robberies and the occasional murder. In December 1929, an intoxicated and paranoid Burke, using the alias Fred Dane, was involved in a minor traffic collision in St. Joseph, Michigan. When patrolman Charles Skelly arrived at the collision, he was shot and killed by Burke. On March 26, 1931, a citizen in the Green City area who had read of Burke and seen his picture in True Detective magazine recognized him as Richard White and notified authorities. Burke was captured at the home of his father-in-law without incident. Returned to Michigan, Burke was convicted of Officer Skelly's murder and given a life sentence at Marquette State Prison. Having been in failing health with diabetes and heart disease for several years, Burke died of a massive heart attack on July 10, 1940. William Dodano Sr. William Dodano Sr., also known as William Russo and Willie Potatoes, was a top enforcer and loan shark for the Chicago outfit and a participant in some high-profile robberies. Born in Chicago, Illinois, Dodano became a member of the 42 Gang, a local street gang from Maxwell Street on Chicago's west side. He lived in North Riverside, Illinois with his wife Mary and 5 children. He never had a known legitimate means of employment or business known to the FBI. After World War II, Dodano became a leading enforcer for the outfit. Though a made man and valued capo in the Chicago outfit, Dodano has been described as a ruthless and pitiless killer who was refined in torture with ice picks and blowtorches, keeping victims alive for hours while torturing them. Dodano also had the responsibility to know who every Chicago burglar was so that the Chicago outfit could take a street tax or tribute percentage of everything they stole. In May 1966, Dodano was arrested and tried for hijacking $1 million in silver bullion, but was later acquitted. He was later arrested for conspiracy to rob a Franklin Park bank, a heist planned by him 6 years earlier. Dodano was sentenced to 15 years in prison at the Marion, Illinois Federal Penitentiary, a supermax prison at the time. On September 9, 1975, he died of natural causes in prison. Sam DiStefano. Samuel Mad Sam DiStefano was an Italian-American gangster who became one of the Chicago outfit's most notorious loan sharks and sociopathic killers. Chicago-based FBI agents consider DiStefano to be the worst torture murderer in the history of the United States. The outfit used the mentally unstable and sadistic DiStefano for the torture murders of mob enemies, targets, and many others. However, due to DiStefano's deranged mental state, the outfit never let him become a made man. At least one outfit insider claimed DiStefano was a devil worshiper. He would say it was his dream in life to own a pig farm so he could feed his victims to the pigs. He even drove to pig farms just to watch them for hours. DiStefano once forced his wife Anita to take his gun and put the end of the barrel in her mouth and then demanded that she pull the trigger. When she pulled the trigger and the gun didn't go off, DiStefano began to laugh and told her he had removed all the bullets. He would tell this story repeatedly to his mob associates for amusement. DiStefano's partner in the drug dealing business was a rogue cop, Tommy Dorso. Dorso said he once saw DiStefano roll on the floor with spit running from his mouth, begging Satan to show him mercy and screaming over and over again, "I'm your servant, command me." In November 1963, DeStefano had a violent argument with Leo Foreman, a real estate agent. Foreman was murdered soon after. DeStefano and his associates were eventually indicted for the Foreman murder. In his previous trials, DeStefano had raised a large amount of public interest with his bizarre behavior. He made demands to represent himself, dressed in pajamas, shouted through bullhorns, and rambled incoherently. The outfit bosses began to worry DeStefano was not only jeopardizing his own defense, but also the defenses of his other crew members. In a secret meeting, the boss of the Chicago outfit, Tony Accardo, gave DeStefano's crew permission to kill him. On April 14, 1973, DeStefano was to have met with his brother in the garage of his Galewood neighborhood home. Before the meeting began, a hitman entered the lot and shot DeStefano twice with a shotgun, hitting him in the chest and tearing his left arm off at the elbow, instantly killing him. The murderer was never brought to trial. Roy DeMeo. Roy Albert DeMeo was an Italian-American mobster in the Gambino crime family of New York City. He headed a group referred to as the DeMeo Crew, which became notorious for the large number of murders they committed and for the grisly way they disposed of the bodies, which became known as the Gemini Method, dubbed after the Gemini Lounge, the primary hangout of the DeMeo Crew as well as the site where most of the crew's victims were killed. The crew was responsible for a very large number of murders, with the majority of them committed by DeMeo himself. DeMeo also built up his loan sharking business with funds stolen from credit union reserves. DeMeo's collection of loan shark customers, while still primarily those in the car industry, soon included other businesses such as dentist offices, an abortion clinic, restaurants, and flea markets, and he frequently told his neighbors he worked in construction, food retailing, and the used car business. Bonanno underboss Salvatore Vitali claimed to the FBI that in 1974 he was ordered to deliver a corpse of a man who had just been murdered to a garage in Queens so that it could be disposed of by DeMeo. The process of the Gemini Method, as revealed by multiple crew members and associates who became government witnesses in the early 1980s, was to lure the victim through the side door of the lounge and into the apartment in the back portion of the building. At this point, victims were killed and dismembered. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo went to a crew member's house for a meeting with his men. 10 days later, on January 20th, DeMeo's Cadillac was discovered in the parking lot of the Verona Boat Club in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. The car was towed to a nearby police station where it was searched by Organized Crime Control Bureau detectives. DeMeo's partially frozen body was found in the trunk with a chandelier on top of it. He had been shot multiple times in the head and had a bullet wound in his hand, assumed by law enforcement to be a reflexive defensive wound caused when his killers opened fire on him. Prosecutor William Mack Jr. said the Roy DeMeo crew is the most violent crew ever prosecuted in federal court as far as my knowledge, and saying DeMeo engaged in wholesale slaughter. Harry Ailman. Harry the Hook Ailman was a Chicago mobster who was one of the most feared enforcers for the Chicago outfit during the 1970s. Ailman got the nickname Hook from his boxing career in high school. He is also famous for being the only person in the United States ever to be acquitted of murder, then legally tried and convicted for murder when the initial trial was found to be corrupt. In the early 1970s, Ailman decided to force independent bookmakers in Chicago to pay extortion payments or street tax to the outfit. If the bookmakers refused, Ailman was willing to use force on them. According to law enforcement and the Chicago Crime Commission, Ailman committed 13 murders in Chicago between 1971 and 1976. His alleged victims included counterfeiters, mob informants, a security guard from a Miami museum that failed to pay his gambling debts, a former police officer, and another mob enforcer. Ailman was prosecuted for only one murder, the 1972 Logan killing. FBI agents were reported to have said that Ailman oozed menace, and his mere presence was usually enough to enforce the outfit's will. He loved to shoot people. He frequently had silencers fitted with his weapons and would not hesitate to shoot in public if needed. He was tallied up with at least 13 hits, but it was not easy to get a conviction for his wrongdoing. On September 27, 1972, Ailman fatally shot Teamsters official William Logan in his Chicago neighborhood. In 1997, Ailman was convicted of the Logan murder and sentenced to 300 years in state prison. Ailman's retrial and subsequent conviction are historic, as he is the first American to be retried for murder following a fraudulent first trial. Harry Ailman died from complications of lung cancer on May 15, 2010 at the Hill Correctional Center in Galesburg, Illinois. He is buried in Waldheim Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. Thomas Patera. Thomas Patera was a mafia hitman in the Bonanno crime family. Patera, a soldier and later on captain of his own crew, was suspected by law enforcement of as many as 60 murders. Patera was well known for his use of karate and other martial arts when fighting, a skill he learned at a young age and which earned him nicknames like Tommy Karate and the Karate Guy. Patera joined the Bonanno crime family and quickly became one of their most feared soldiers. During the 1980s, Patera became a made man of the Bonanno family and was assigned to Frank Leno's crew. Patera's approach to murder and body disposal was cold-hearted and clinical. He used the Staten Island graveyard because he believed that the damp soil would accelerate decomposition and the wildlife refuge would ensure the bodies were not discovered during construction projects. Patera studied books on dissection and carried a special toolkit for cutting up bodies. He always insisted on burying corpses deep enough so that the police dogs could not locate their scents. Before burying body parts, he either wrapped them up in plastic or placed them in suitcases. Patera's weaknesses was that he enjoyed keeping jewelry and other souvenirs of his work. On June 25, 1992, Patera was convicted of murdering 6 people and supervising a massive drug-dealing operation in Brooklyn. Alluding to evidence that Patera brutally killed his victims and dismembered their bodies, Judge Rena Raggi sentenced him to life in prison, saying, "Mr. Patera, nobody deserves to die as these people died." As of April 2017, Patera is serving a life sentence at the United States Penitentiary, McCreary near Pine Knot, Kentucky. Patera's inmate number is 29465-053. John Scalise. Made famous for his gruesome death by Al Capone, John Scalise was an Italian-American organized crime figure of the early 20th century and with partner Albert Anselmi was one of the Chicago outfit's most successful hitmen in Prohibition-era Chicago. Shortly after he began working for the Jennas, Scalise met Albert Anselmi, who became his mentor and best friend. Both men remain to this day the prime suspects in the November 1924 murder of Dean O'Banion, boss of Chicago's North Side Gang. Soon after O'Banion's murder, Scalise and Anselmi secretly defected from the Jennas to Al Capone's Chicago outfit. On June 13, 1925, Anselmi and Scalise, along with Mike Jenna, ambushed Northsiders George Bugs Moran and Vincent the Schemer Drusi in the Patch, shooting up their car with shotguns and wounding Drusi. A shootout with police ensued, and during the raging gun battle, Chicago police officers Harold Olson and Charles Walsh were killed and Michael Conway severely wounded. Anselmi and Scalise were found guilty of the manslaughter of Officer Walsh and were sentenced to 14 years in prison. Granted a retrial in the Walsh killing, the 2 men were acquitted. Capone threw them a grand party, climaxed by a shootout with champagne bottle corks. In the early morning hours of May 8, 1929, the bodies of Scalise, Anselmi, and Giunta were discovered on a lonely road near Hammond, Indiana. All 3 had been severely beaten and shot to death. Al Capone had discovered that Scalise, Anselmi, and mobster Joseph Hoptoad Giunta were conspiring with a rival mobster to betray him. During a charade concocted for their benefit, Capone staged a fake argument with Frankie Rio in front of Scalise and Anselmi and then slapped his bodyguard, who ran from the room. Both killers tracked Frankie Rio down and offered to bring him in on their plans to kill Capone. After confirmation of the treachery, an elaborate ruse was developed to get rid of the plotters. At the climax of a dinner thrown in their honor, Capone produced a baseball bat and beat the 3 men nearly to death before gunmen stepped in to finish the job. In the end, they all met their fates, just as they had dealt out to their victims. The mob life is an interesting era to look at, but the gruesome tales of death and horror these men handed out is something we hope never surges again. Until next time.